have been looking forward, as I always do when I get guests, but this guest today has a very special place both in the podcast journey, but also in my heart, because Mike and I, we connected some years ago at a carnival. It must be before pre-pandemic. And Mike has an incredible background, and he's doing in principle what I also love to do, is actually getting the full potential out of human beings so we can make the world a better place. But Mike is also a fellow Dane. So I was really excited that he finally came back and said, "Oh, I think I'm ready now." He almost called it shameless self-promotion, but I don't think so. I think this is going to be a great conversation where I think we're all going to reflect a bit on how we actually play better together. So welcome to the show, Mike. I'm super excited about today's conversation, as I've told you many, many times.
Thank you so much, Michael. I feel really humble and I'm very honored to be on your famous podcast. I think it's fantastic the work that you do. And yeah, I've been looking forward to it as well. But I also feel humbled, I must admit. So I'm ready.
Good, Mike. So I know your story, but the audience, they probably be good to hear, because there's a good reason for why you actually are trying helping people to play better together. But there's a journey, of course, like in anything. So what is your journey? What's the story? And how did Mike actually started working with leadership, people, and actually making organizations better?
So I have to sort of think how I present this for you in a reason. I have gray hair. I mean, I've been around for a while, so it's been a long journey, and I started very early. So like many others in the hospitality industry, I did not enjoy school. I really hated school. I was so bored. I was bored out of my skull, and school didn't really appreciate me either. So I got chucked out of quite a few schools. I think 5 or something like that. And at the age of 18, which is the legal age in Denmark where you can actually leave school, and much to the consternation of my parents, I left school. And it was such a relief. And then I had a sort of list. I took a Sunday paper and I had a list of 5 possible jobs that I could probably apply for. I didn't have a lot of experience or education, so you can imagine they were limited. And the top of that list was what we in English call a bellboy, but in Danish it had a fancy name. It was called vagtmester, and so I thought that sounded sort of exotic in some way, and so I applied for this job as a bellboy at the Hotel d'Angleterre in Copenhagen as the first one, and because I knew where it was and I could. So I went in there, and as you mentioned, I'm Danish, but I have this. I have my father's British, and so I have this bilingual background, and I spoke to them and they were very happy and they took me on straight away. And I started the next day. And for me, it was like somebody had hit me over the head with a baseball bat. After 3 days, I had this, I promise you, it was like a revelation. I just went, this is what I want to do with my life. This is it. This is what it's all about. And I was completely thrilled by it, and it was a transformation in that sense because it also transformed that sort of. I had a lot of energy, and some of it wasn't always as constructive as it maybe could be, and suddenly this became very constructive, and so I put all my energy and enthusiasm into trying to learn this. What's this about? I took all the shifts I could. I tried to get extra shifts with the hall porter, and soon I was in reception, and that's how I worked. And so long story short, that was how I got into this. And then I remember very, very clearly that one day I was walking behind the general manager and the front office manager. They were walking in the hall in front of me. I was right behind, and I could hear what they were talking about. And they were discussing something about some rooms that guests or whatever it was. And I was walking behind them, and I was just going, it's incredible, isn't it? They don't see me. They never notice me in any way. I'm just there with my suitcases. But if they would turn around and stop and ask me, I could answer that question for them because I speak to the guests and I see how they react to certain. I know exactly what's wrong with those rooms because I hear it and I pick it up. And I made this mental note that one day when I'm going to be a general manager, that was my dream. That was what was very clear in those first weeks that I want to be a general manager. When I become a general manager, I am going to take care of what I then at that time labeled the little people, the small people who are unseen in the hotel.
Mhm.
And it was very, very clear for me. I still haven't managed to become a general manager in a hotel. I'd still like to do it. I've done all sorts of other jobs in this industry, but that one I didn't nail yet. And if somebody came and offered me that, I might even still consider going back into it. But that shaped very much my thinking in those years. And fast forward, I then found myself in Paris. Shortly after that, I had a job as the doorman at the Hotel Bristol in Paris, and then I was promoted to the liftier. And so I worked the lift, which was a manual lift, an old-fashioned lift in the hotel there, and also ended up in the reception in there. And there, more than anywhere, did I understand this thing about the unseen people. Really, when you're the liftier and you're doorman, you are nothing. You are really nothing. But you have the contact with the guests and you all of the rest of it. And so this really sort of entered into my brain. And then the next big step in my journey was, and it's too long to explain, and nobody's going to believe this, but at the end of 21, I suddenly found myself as the general manager of a Danish-owned restaurant in Paris, which was an American themed. It was one of the first American themed hamburgers with T-bone steaks, and the French were all excited about it because it was this new American style. And first I was the assistant manager, and then the manager was fired, and then I was suddenly a manager, and the owner was in Denmark. And so at the age of 21 and a half or something like that, I had 25 employees and no experience of any use, anything. And I just had to learn. And it was one of these, again, formative experiences, because the feedback was like this. Nobody, three
Yeah.
people quit yesterday. Oh, what did I do? and so it was a really, really steep learning curve. And I spent 4.5 years in Paris running that restaurant. And a lot of what I've learned ever since all came from that period, sort of hands-on
Mm.
understanding how to do that. And then I came back to Copenhagen, also running restaurants for somebody else. And at the age of 27, 28, I decided I wanted my own restaurant. And so I bought my first restaurant. And again, peculiar circumstances, I ended up with 4 restaurants in a bundle. And I was really, really proud of myself because I'd managed to buy them without actually having any money. So I'd financed them. But I didn't understand a lot about finance and all of that stuff. So I'd financed them at about 16% interest on letters of debt. And I had at that time, my bank credit was, I think, 18%. And if I had an overdraft, it was 22, 23, something like that. And after a short while, I realized that I got myself into something that was rather, rather tricky. So I spent the next 10 years pedaling like crazy, running these 4 restaurants. And I worked 365 days a year. You know the road. It was
Yeah.
just, yeah. I had a bunch of keys, this size. I did everything. I did the plumbing. I did the cash register. I took the extra shifts. I did the dishwashing when something was needed. And it was all in there. And at the age of about 36, I suddenly woke up one morning and I went, it's got to be it. This is not life. This doesn't work for me. I've got it. This is completely crazy. And I sold everything and I moved back to Paris. And then I spent quite some time sort of wandering around thinking, so what do you do when you're 36 and burned out? and so that then developed into, again, fun circumstances. People started contacting me, could you help us with this project, or could you come and do this for us for 3 months? And so I had developed a sort of you'd probably call it a consulting business at that time, but it was very sort of low key. It was just me helping out from word of mouth. People would say, get Mike to help you with that for 3 months or whatever. And so I found myself suddenly in Cape Town, South Africa, where, again, a Danish guy, the same guy that owned the original restaurant in Paris, asked me to come and help him because Mandela had just been elected president, apartheid was gone, and he had a really good nose for business. He said, tourism is going to boom now, and I want to be in on the ground floor in Cape Town because that's where everybody wants to be and to go.
Mm.
So I want to create a restaurant company in Cape Town. And I want you to help me with that. I've already bought a nightclub and 2 small cafes. And please, could you help me be there for the takeover and then help me for the first 3 months, just get things rolling, find a GM and get it all set up. Okay, fun thing. So I packed my stuff, and my wife and I went off to Cape Town. And after 3 months, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. So I don't know, Africa is Africa and things take longer time. I don't know. We weren't getting anywhere. And so 3 months became 6 months, and 6 months became a year. And then finally we were getting somewhere. And suddenly I was sort of beginning to understand what this was about. And in that process, I wrote him a long letter, and I said, "So you're approaching this the wrong way. We can't build our own restaurant. We've tried to create our own restaurants. We don't understand this market. We don't understand how it works. We're putting them in the wrong locations. We're serving the wrong kind of stuff, and it's not working. The only thing that works is the nightclub on the beach. We had this huge nightclub which is famous. If anybody's been to Cape Town in that period, it was called La Med, and it was on the beachfront, and it was an amazing place. It was completely packed from Friday afternoon till Sunday evening, crowds and crowds of people. And I said the lesson we can learn from that is that what we did with that club is we put in what I would call Scandinavian management methods in there. A certain structure. We started counting things and that sort of stuff. But we also put a sort of a human approach to how we will manage things. And the thing really blossomed. It really boomed. And I said, if you want to continue here in South Africa, what you need to do is buy big existing restaurants that have enough turnover that they can carry decent management. So we could get decent people to run them, and you put in Scandinavian management thinking around that, and then you're going to blossom. It's going to be, but that's my recommendation for you. Here's a list of things you could do. And by the way, I'm going back to Europe now. Thank you very much. And then he called me and said, "This is typical consultant bullshit." He said, "You print this fantastic report, and nowhere in this beautiful report does it say who's going to do it. You say, I'm going to come to Cape Town and do this for you? Or what? What's the idea? It's a useless idea. No, if you think you're so smart," he said, "you do it. I'll give you carte blanche." He says, "You have the reporters in front of you. You say one could build a huge turnover in 5-6 years. You do it. Here's the checkbook. So I'll pay for it. You do it."
Mm-hmm.
So I'd promised myself and my wife that we weren't doing any more restaurant business in that sense. But this was really tempting. It was fun. It was a lovely crowd. I loved the people. The climate is absolutely tolerable.
Yeah.
And so we started that process of actually scouting for big establishments. We bought Key 4, which a lot of people who've been tourists in Cape Town also know. We ended up buying Key 4 as well, down on the waterfront. We bought these very big restaurants, and we went through this process of counting things, making the financial aspects of it transparent. In South Africa at the time, managers of restaurants didn't know anything except the turnover. They didn't know how the finances or the economy was all put together. And so there was no transparency. So I put in transparency and accountability and a lot of self-governance. So we ended up at the end of the day with 10 restaurants spread out over a larger Cape Town area or whatever it was. And there was no way I could be in 10 restaurants at the same time. So I had to work with a really decentralized structure. Each restaurant, they were big restaurants, had a manager, and they were in charge. Mm-hmm. And that was the big learning. That was the big learning for me. It was another sort of transformational shift for me, because it was this: I only had one key, not the big bunch of keys. I only had one job: try and remove obstacles for the others in order for them to do the job. I didn't understand the market. I didn't understand the people. I didn't understand the culture. I could just point and say, "I'd like us to go this way. How do we get there? Help me get there. Tell me what we need to do." And it was amazing. It was an amazing thing. And so I think so out of that 5-6 year period, something started crystallizing. The first thing that started crystallizing was that I decided in that whole process to do an MBA, because I suddenly realized that I was in over my head. I was building a really big business, and I thought I need to strengthen my own capacity. And in that process, I came across the service profit chain, which was just out at that time with 360 pages, dense regression analysis and explanations. So not a lot of people get through it. And I gobbled it up, and I thought, wow, this is actually a lot of this I'm already doing. I just didn't know why. And now I suddenly saw in a bigger context why, that this focus, this people first approach, creates that loyalty in the customer base that you're looking for. And that's actually what makes it work. But it then also became very clear for me that you can explain the service profit chain to people very simply. I can do that. I can do it in maybe in 10 minutes. But if you really want a good understanding, it takes me an hour to really explain. So what is the service profit chain? How does it work? And that whole concept. But then it's understood. The problem is then how do you execute it? Because it's a really nice and really, really solid framework, but you need to deliver on it. And in that process, it became really clear to me that the only way to be successful with that is you have to raise the leadership quality. It becomes the quality of the leadership that you have on board determines whether you are able to implement that whole service profit chain thinking. That is absolutely crucial. And that has a lot to do, we can get into that later, but that has a lot to do with not focusing so much about the task side of their job, but on the relationship of their job. And getting them to understand how do they create the circumstances in which our employees thrive and feel responsible and want to do their best and all the rest of it. That becomes the leadership job. And that's the foundation of the service profit chain thinking. So that's been the whole red thread. And that comes all the way back then to my first days at the d'Angleterre. And this is how do we make sure that we're taking care of the little people? Because if we take care of the little people, they are the ones that make the damn thing run. And so that's been my journey, if you like.
Yeah,
Well, it didn't end there. It didn't end there, of course, Michael, because then
exactly,
because then after what was it in 2001? I on the famous New Year's Eve when we went into the year 2000, I asked my wife at 4:00 in the morning, "Do you see yourself getting old in South Africa?" And then she said, "Are you crazy? I want to go back to Europe at some point. I mean, we can't stay here for the rest of our life." I said, "Well, then we need to start thinking about when is it that we go back, because the more we spend time away from Europe, the harder it's going to be to get back." And so we took the decision, the very, very hard decision. It was really heartbreaking to quit that job and go back to Europe. And the next question was then, so what do you want to do, Mike? Was from my wife. What do you want, another CEO job like that? And I was going, so what did I really enjoy while I was a CEO? Well, what I really enjoyed was that leadership development part, because I very soon realized I could hire people to all the other stuff that was going on. But when I sent these managers that I had, I sent them to courses. We could send them to 1-day leadership course, 2-day leadership course. They came back with these beautiful folders that said leadership module 1, 2, and 3. And I could ask them questions, and they had more knowledge, but they didn't do it. They didn't change anything. And so in that whole process, when I was there, I started sort of experimenting with so what does it actually take for grown-ups to change, to actually learn something and implement it. And then I started developing my own leadership programs, and I started doing my own teaching. And because I found that was actually the most effective way of using my own time. And that then became the foundation. When I went back to Europe, I then started saying, so what have I really enjoyed? I really enjoyed the leadership development part. I thought that was fun. And I really shifted something. It really made a change. And so I decided to create this flagship leadership program that I had run in my own class, which I call Grow Leadership, based on the Whitmore model, coaching model of Grow. And then we came back. We started in Denmark, naturally enough, and I would walk around with my bag, I think for over a year, trying to get people to buy into a concept where instead of having leadership development as a 1-day, 2-day, 3-day workshop, to have something that actually runs over 12 weeks. Because if you want people to change anything significantly, you need time.
Yeah.
Nobody changes because they've watched a video or heard something or read a book or something. It takes some kind of time. It needs time, and it needs reflection, and it needs some kind of interaction with your workplace. So there has to be this sort of notion, what I'm learning just now, how does that apply to what I'm doing tomorrow? And when I do that tomorrow, how do I then, what are the results that I then get from that? How can I learn from that? And so I built up this this leadership program, which had a component of a startup workshop in the traditional sense, but then combining it with logbooks. So I require everybody who work on that kind of program to submit a logbook every Friday afternoon. What was your focus this week? What did you learn? What are you going to focus on next week? And then I give them feedback on that. They do that for 12 weeks. And on top of that, I have put them together in triads. So then every other week, I would have a coaching session face to face where we would sit, three of them and me, and have a session around, so what are they learning and how they're implementing it. So they both learn from me, but they also learn coaching by me modeling, me coaching them. So they start understanding how does that work when you're trying to coach somebody to get better. And then we have this effect that very clearly they started asking each other questions that I would never have thought of, because they are in it and they know exactly what the sore points are. And sometimes I would go, wow, why didn't I think of that? So obvious things, but they were really good at that. And so that has become my sort of my flagship. That's my thing, if you like. And I've been running that Grow Leadership program for hotel chains, for big amusement parks all over Scandinavia, other places in the world as well. I've been to Dubai with it and places like that. And so that's what I do. And as a byproduct, you could say, of that is that I then also have a lot of coaching clients that either are come as a result of that. Somebody says, I'd actually like to continue this conversation with you. Could you help me with that? Or somebody says, I have a colleague who went on your course. Could we have a chat about something? And so we do that. That can be anything from a one-off to a structured program over some kind of time. But that's essentially what it is. And it's all rooted in there's a red thread all the way back
And that's
to
also
being a
what
well.
I and I've always been fascinated about that, because one of the things that we really quickly, theoretically, we connected really well on the service profit chain, because I haven't
Yes.
met many in my journey as well that have geeked so much about this service profit chain and the power of it. I used it myself. I was running restaurants and multiple restaurants like you, because just had to decentralize. I didn't have the money to have a big policing squad in an office to go and run these restaurants. I had to
Yeah.
decentralize, and I have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
better leaders on site, because that
Yeah.
was the key to the success. And it was also in university, one of the professors gave me good to great and the service profit chain in the hand. So you should write a dissertation that became good to great first, and then I found out, oh, I actually have to implement these concepts, and I need something a bit more tangible. And that's again service profit chain. There's a lot of case studies in there. So if you haven't read that yet, and even though it's a book, I think it's from late 70s, isn't it? 78, I think the book is from. And the
Yeah.
study is
No, the
probably
service profiting actually came out in '94.
94, the book, yeah. And I think,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah. The
studies
book
goes
came
all
out.
the way back to the 70s, where James L. Hesketh and
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
Howard
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can go
Yeah.
back and
Absolutely.
find papers that's very complex, as you
Yes.
say.
Yes.
And you probably have to be a geek. You don't have to read those. You can just go to Mike's website. He's helped you simplify it. But what is the mission now, Mike? Because in the early days, it's about getting the little people seen and heard, and you said that's followed you too. But what is the big mission right now? What is the change you want to see in the world and with the work you do and get you up every morning?
It's still connected, because it's still connected to the little people, because in that sense, what is it that makes the world run around? What makes life fun for the little people? It's all about leadership. And so the driver of the service industry for me is this notion of understanding this notion of what is leadership really all about. Because there is a the industry has a tendency to be a little bit skewed in my opinion. Because if you think about it, if you're working in a restaurant, what is the waiter who gets promoted to assistant head waiter or whatever, supervisor or whatever, and the same thing, assistant sous chef in the kitchen, whatever. It's somebody who's good at getting things done.
Hmm.
It's somebody who's good at the tasks. And so whoever is good at the tasks shines from a top management point of view. Oh, it's so nice with Jill because she really gets things done. So Jill gets promoted to supervisor. she doesn't get promoted to supervisor because of her relationship skills, but because of her task execution skills. And if she's really good at the task execution, she gets another promotion.
Yeah.
And so we have a tendency to skew the whole organization towards an orientation around people who are really good at executing tasks. It's an industry also. We have firefighters all around. We can really get things done, and we need people who are good at that and structured at that. But we forget, funnily enough, in the hospitality industry, which is all about relationships, we forget that there is a relational aspect to getting things done. And so you and I have had many discussions about this whole notion about the great resignations and why people don't want to work in the industry and all the rest of it. And when we really sort of analyze that, and what it boils down to is people, especially this younger generation that's coming into the industry now, they don't just want a job, they want a relationship with their job. But you don't have a relationship with the building, you have a relationship with the people who are in the building. And primarily, you have a relationship with your immediate supervisor. So when we look at resignations and all the rest of it, it comes out loud and clear in all the surveys. The primary reason, 85%, 90% of the true reason why people leave a job is because they don't get on with their immediate supervisor. There's a friction, and they decide to leave. And I think so this comes out. It also comes out, when we look at the Gallup engagement surveys and all of this that keep on year after year telling us that we only have 15% engaged workforce and all the rest of it. And I think I don't know very much about it, but if you're canning sardines or building bikes in China or something like that, I don't know, maybe you can come to work every day and not be engaged. Do the job, go home according to spec, do the job according to spec, go home, and that's fine. But you cannot run or you cannot operate in the hospitality business and not be engaged, because the difference in experience for the customer is like night and day. Somebody who just has a job, here's your beer or whatever it is, and somebody who is enthusiastic and who is engaged and who wants to do their best for your experience. It's like chalk and cheese. And so we've got to get engagement in. And so for me, it's all about the engagement. So many people feel, or sometimes misunderstood, Mike's a softie and it's all about the small people and all. No, it's business. It's hardcore business. If we get that right, the business thrives.
Yeah, and you're so spot on, because if I go back and say where relationships, if you gave scores, if I had my own score always from 1 to 10 was low, it was very hard to get the hard things working, the bottom
Yeah.
line, because we couldn't collaborate in a
Yeah.
healthy way to achieve that. We were actually looking for ways to get rid of each other or make each other look bad, and that becomes that
Horrible.
whole
Yeah.
political game. We also call it politics.
Yes.
That's a nice way
Yes.
to wrap it in, that we are nasty
Yes.
to each other, I normally say. And we actually
Yeah.
not there for the greater good of the cause. We are there for our own sake. And that's also what it
Yes.
comes down to.
Yeah.
And it'd be really
Yeah.
fascinating, Mike, to follow you when you've been on this journey, and it's like, and it's probably, you see it the same way. It's unwrapping from the early days at Dangleterre in Copenhagen to where it's about the little people, and now to the service profit chain, being the CEO of a very big complex business, and then now seeing a world that becomes more and more complex. And now you've developed
Yes.
this new concept, which I really wanted to talk about as well, like plays well with others. And it's early days, but you already had some learnings around, that. And
Yes.
tell us a bit more of that, because I think it's fascinating. It's so simple, but it's fascinating and so spot on, and actually touch on what we're just talking about now, the whole relationship aspects of life and work.
Yeah, exactly. It ties in, it all ties into this. So I was doing some reflecting. I was going through the notes that I take after my coaching sessions with the people that I've been coaching for the past year or so, and I was going through them to sort of see what is the red thread. Is there a common denominator in these problems that people would like to be coached around? And suddenly it came very clear to me, it's all about relationships. 9 out of 10 of the people that I've been speaking to and helping and working with have some challenge which is relational. It is about a boss, it's about colleagues, it's about employees or whatever it is. But it's always, I would like to do this and it's not working and I'm frustrated. And what are we going to do about that? And so it struck me that this is actually, and then I started sort of researching a little bit more about it, and I suddenly realized this is a huge problem.
Mm.
This is actually it is the problem out there, in the sense that when we also talk of the big resignation. So why is it that people, yes, they leave their job because of their immediate supervisor, but what's the problem with the immediate supervisor? It's a lack of collaboration. It's a lack of seeing the other. It doesn't see me in that sense. And so what is and then it's also a frustration that a lot of people feel, I'm really good at my job, but when I try and do my job well, I feel I can't do it. I get sabotaged because these people aren't collaborating, or these people are ignoring me, or I don't feel I get heard when I want to do this or that or the other. And so in that sense, you when you have that feeling that you're not, that whatever it is that you're good at doesn't actually, you can't do it in the best possible way, you become disengaged. Well, what's the point? Okay, so I just come to work and I'll do my best, whatever I can. But I mean, why put in a lot of effort if we can't do it? And so it struck me that in some senses, I also have this feeling, in some ways, that people are tired of being told that they need to work more on their leadership, because we've been talking about it for God knows how long, and it doesn't seem to make a big dent. And so I was also thinking, so what's a different framing of the whole problem here? Let's try and frame this in a different way and say, if we can frame this in a different way and start talking about how do we get better at working well with each other, regardless of positions. Because in a highly complex world, the more complex world that we are working in, the more important the collaboration becomes. Collaboration becomes a competitive advantage. It is the way that your organization suddenly can react fast. We talk a lot about agile and responding to changing circumstances and VUCA worlds and all the rest of that stuff. But what is it that's actually needed in order to cope with fast changing environments? It's collaboration. It's instant. Without going through a lot of rigmarole or formalities, whatever it is, I grab the phone, we have this problem, what are we going to do? I'll help you fix your boom, 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 bang, done. And that makes the world go around. But if it suddenly bogs down into silos and competencies and responsibilities and blame and all the rest of it, well, then we get stuck. And then we don't actually achieve what we probably could. So I've decided now that I really want to focus over the next period. Now it's going to be my big focus. Is I want to drive this agenda. So we need to start a conversation around, how do we collaborate better? What does it mean to collaborate? What is my own responsibility in collaboration? Do I know myself well enough? Do I understand where it is that my strengths and weaknesses are? Do I have that self-awareness? Do I have the empathy to understand how other people function? And am I concerned enough to ask, so Michael, how are you today?
Mm.
What do you need? And so to what extent do we do that? And so that's what I've been putting together. And I'm sitting here down here in the south of France, and I'm putting all this together, and I'm going to bring it out in September, in various forms and ways. But it's going to be my next sort of main agenda over the coming years. I can see that, because I can also feel when I start talking about it that I get these, like you, nodding, going, yes, I know what you're talking about. This is actually a problem. It is
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think we've been, because I also still works with a lot of founders, CEOs, meet them in connection with my own business, Pulse Kitchen, and often they, when they ask me for advice, it's often around how they build the organization and the culture bit, and as I was preparing for this, and we've been talking the last year, it just became very clear to me. Actually, the biggest challenge is collaboration and getting the team to work well together. It's not hiring the right competences and getting the job description and the accountability piece. That's really technical, but it's really that more emotional. It's like a sixth sense they need to develop. And my question that started to come around, also a question I want to ask you now, Mike, is that so I think we are aware as leaders this is what we struggle with, but why don't we do anything about it? Because it's not a new challenge. Go but all the way back to the service profit chains talks about your ability as a leader to raise yourself and raise the people
Yeah.
below you and actually collaborate to make the different parts of the service profit chain work. So what is your reflection on that?
My reflection on that is that it doesn't happen, first of all, because we're not really aware that it requires something of us that is not something that just happens automatically.
Hmm.
So Peter Block, the author that I really appreciate, also he wrote somewhere about social contracting. So he has a whole sort of quite academic explanation, but that's what it's essentially about. It's about learning social contracting. So we need, before we start any project, any meeting, any week, any year, anything where we're going to do something together, we need to start off by doing some social contracting. We need to agree on why are we doing it, what is important, what do we need, all of this kind of stuff. And we need to spend time doing that. And the problem is that we all feel we're too busy, so we want to move straight into here's the project plan, this is the action plan, now go do it. And then as we get further along that path, we suddenly things come unstuck and we get bogged down. And then all that good time we saved by not doing our social contracting is completely wasted out the window in bad results. If we'd only spent a little bit more time doing that in a sensible way, we would have fixed it. I had a lovely example a few years ago. I'll put this in here, and you could, I don't know if you know, but I had a group of a building company. They were building a big school up in Denmark, and they were horribly behind on their time schedule. And the guy called me and said, "I have a feeling that this is not working because we basically are not collaborating optimally, and we're blaming each other, and we're going to be fined and all the rest of it, and we're so bogged down, and I really don't know what to do about it." He said, "The leader, I'm really stuck. Can you come up and work with us for us?" I said, "I can't because I'm really busy. I'll tell you what, next weekend I was actually planning to be home. We can meet in Nice. If you come down on Friday evening, we can work Saturday and Sunday morning, and we can see what we can do and try and see if we can help you sort it out, make a plan so you can get forward." And then we spent all of Saturday. I won't go into it, take all the time, but basically all of Saturday social contracting, getting to know each other a little bit better, doing completely basic sort of profiles of each other, negotiating, working out all of it. And he kept sort of, we have to talk about the time frame and the plan that we're supposed to do. And now you're doing all this kind of social feel good work. And when are we going to talk about the project plan? And we're behind. I said, leave it. I'll get there. And so we worked all the way through Saturday, and then we went out and had dinner in Nice together in the evening. And the next morning they came in, and I just stepped back and said, and now we need to start working on this part. And then they fixed it. And they fixed it in 2.5 hours because suddenly we had a different understanding about our relationships, our needs, about what we were doing. I didn't get involved in that. I don't know anything about constructing at school, but I had created a container for them where suddenly they were able to collaborate. And then I just stepped back and we finished before time. And he was just, how did that happen? Well, it happened because we took the time to work out with each other what it is we're trying to do and how we want to do it with each other. And that saves us so much time in the other end.
It's super interesting because I'm also, I'm a big fan of Singerman's, and I've had Ari,
Yes,
the founder, on the
yes,
podcast, and
yes, yes,
they're very
yes,
much on the social contract, and he's a big fan of Peter Block as well, and he talks about you need, before you start anything, any size of project, you need to have a shared vision, and you need to stay in that stage as
yes.
long as it takes to get not agreement, but alignment and understanding of each
Yes.
other's concerns and
Yeah,
expectations, because then you can work on from there. And there,
yeah,
and in that way of working, because you need to be together, what happens is
yeah,
that you really build this social strengths, and you talk about other
yeah,
things as well, which then suddenly they become a human being to you, not a colleague, not somebody you're
yeah,
executing
exactly.
with.
Yeah, exactly. Are you familiar with the Drexler Sibit team high performance model, the V? You come
No, that
across that?
yeah. Tell us a bit more about that. I've heard about it, but I'm not. You
Yeah.
probably know much
So
more
it's
than I
it's
do.
really good. It's a really nice piece of work that Drexler Sibit have put together. I can send it to you at some point. But the basic thing is what they took was some behavioral psychologists have determined that there are 4 questions that we all ask ourselves when we go into any new kind of situation with other people. And the 4, we don't say them out loud, but they're very, very present in us. The first one is why. Why am I here? Why is this important? What are we doing here? What is it? And if we don't get that question answered, then we sit in confusion and we don't really get very much further. Because then we're already confused. The next thing we ask is, who am I doing this with? Oh, I'm doing this with Michael. I'm doing my interview with Michael today. Well, that's nice. I know Michael. I feel comfortable with Michael. Not a problem. Maybe it was somebody, it could have been somebody completely I didn't know. It would be a different we space. It would be a different relationship. I would have to think a little bit about, do I need to research that? Do I need to think? Do I need to state anything that's important for me? How do I negotiate that? So there's a whole thing that needs to be put in place around the who part. And once the who part is clear, then we need to decide, and then I need to understand, so what is it that we're doing in the term of roles? What is my role? What is your role? And what is the goal for what we're trying to do? And then we move into the how part. How are we actually, we start this, how are we actually going to approach it? And then we can start making a plan. And so it has this V shape in a sense, because you start in uncertainty and then you move closer and closer to certainty. At the bottom of the V, you have the how. And that
Mm.
is what I hit Saturday evening with the group of builders. When we got to the bottom of that, because it became clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. And I follow exactly that model. That's a model I always use. Why, who, what, and how. And then once that was established, then we start moving back towards uncertainty, because now we make a plan and that starts getting a little more uncertain. Then we start executing, it gets very uncertain, and then we deliver and we're finished. And we're all the way back into uncertainty, because then we say to ourselves, now we've built the school, what now?
Mm.
And that I call that the what now blues. So you've had that if you've been studying for an exam for a long time or built something fantastic and you finished it, and then you go, oh, so what now? And so you need to find a new why. So you need to go
Mm.
back, in a sense, and think, so why would I do this again? Or what do I want to do tomorrow? But in the essence, we go through this V model, this uncertain, certain flow, oscillation the whole time. So every day we go to work, we need to understand, why do I go to work? And then we do the whole thing. And then when the evening comes, we go, okay, that was today. And then we ask ourselves, do I really want to come back tomorrow? Maybe. Depends
Mm.
how that ended. So that's a whole other question. But so we have pre-shift meetings. That's a really good thing. So we should also have post-shift meetings, because we should clear up the day
Yeah.
before we send people home with a bad feeling because they had a rough customer or somebody who was nasty to them, or we suddenly had a discussion, you and I, in a heated moment, and I shouted at you that you're whatever. And then if I can clear that up in the evening before I go home, and we can look each other in the eye and say, I'm sorry about that, Mike. I didn't mean that. I'm a hothead. Sorry. And we can clear it up, then it's much easier for you to come back to work next day. But if
And
not, you're going to say in the morning, oh, I'm going to have to work with Mike again. And the way he was behaved yesterday, I can't face that. He is such a hothead.
that's super interesting, because now actually what you are giving people here is actually a way to get started as well, to work
Exactly.
together better, because this is
Yes.
like, yeah, there's a framework here, and it's probably going to feel awkward the first time you're doing this as
Feels
a lead, a
awkward.
bit like cycling. The first time you do that,
Yeah.
you're probably going to tip over and you're going to miss some
Yeah.
things in the process. But actually you have like a muscle, you have to use that
Yeah.
process because it
Exactly.
works. And actually my own learnings, but I've heard about the Drexler model when I went to university in strategy and leadership, but I never really used it myself. But in principle, I've been doing that, and the times where I forgot I called it the reflection of the day, which I do now constantly myself, but actually where we need to stop at the end of the day to talk about all of the things we missed. then we celebrate all the things we really succeeded at, and then what is it that we need then to move on from tomorrow, or if there's been some kind of conflict, which there will be in a good leadership team. There will be lots of conflicts,
Yeah.
and you just have to say sorry sometimes, because sometimes you also, no matter how right you are, the way you deliver it's maybe not the right way, and then it becomes more about that next day, that the other one feels hurt or angry about that, and you haven't put that away, and that just then keep on building in a
Yes.
way, coming back to working well
Exactly.
together. Yeah, but it's hard.
And if you
It's
think,
very hard to do this, I think.
yes, yeah. But if you think about it, Michael, there's also this notion that we talk a lot about psychological safety or emotional safety.
Mm.
If you do the V model rigorously as part of your way of working, then you're already 80% there in establishing a psychological safe space. It's such an important tool in doing that. So many things fall into place if you do that.
Yeah, and psychological safety, you talked about that a lot in other stuff you do, but also in connection with this. Like, I guess that's the foundation, that we actually, baseline, we feel
Yes,
that this is a
because you,
safe environment. I can actually
yes,
contribute, I can say what I think, and all those things.
yes,
And you say, if you do this journey, you have seen that the V model, that actually that's the outcome that will
yeah,
come eventually.
yeah. And it's I teach this to chefs. I say to chefs, that's how you start your day. You start your day with a V model.
Hmm.
Get everybody together. You set the scene. What's important today? Why are we here? Who's here? Well, and then you do a check-in with the team around you, and you go, so give me, how's life? Michael goes, life is fine. Joe goes, didn't sleep so well because I have a 1-year-old and she screamed all night. Okay. And so we go the whole way around, and now we understand. Now we've all checked in during the who part, and in that sense, now I know how I'm going to put people on the different stations today. I'm not going to put Jim out in the front because he hasn't slept all night. I'll put Michael out front. He seems he's in a good mood today, so he can go out front. So already there, I said, now I can define the roles and the goals. Who's going to do what and how we're going to do it. And the more focus as a leader I have on the first part of the V model, the more I can retract. And it means that when we get to the bottom, when they start discussing the how, you can take your foot off the pedal. Let them work out how they want to do it once you have set the scene. So how would you like to solve this? This is where we want to go today. How do we do that?
And then I
That
guess
is,
you have to step back and have the
yes,
patience, because as leader, often you would know the answer, all the steps that needs to be
you,
taken.
you go from driving the process all the way down to observing as you move into the next phase. And then you intervene if you have to intervene, but you try not to. You try and let them work it out. Or you coach, you ask questions, but you try and step, you're not driving it, they are driving it.
Hmm. When you're thinking about that, how do you get, you maybe you're a leader listening into this and thinking, I really want to do this, but how do I actually get my team behind this as I go on this journey? They might think that we are doing something that's a bit, awkward. Why are we doing this? Does he or she want to control my mind? There will be lots of people who have different thoughts about that. The reason why
You
not to
think
do
the
it.
V model part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when we work with coaching, we always run into this challenge that people will have a belief. I can't do that. I'm not good at that, or that doesn't work, or I can't have that conversation with my boss. And so, and it's the same thing here. People will have some kind of belief that's too time consuming, it's too touchy feely, blah, blah. I've heard it all.
Mm.
So, in these situations where we're trying to change what people believe, that's really hard. And the only way we can do it is we have to try and design relatively small, safe experiments for them to try out. Try a little step, try this part of it, or try just having this conversation, or try this. And once they have that, then we need them to, as you and I talked about previously, we need to reflect. So what happened? Was it a catastrophe? No, it wasn't actually. It actually was okay. Yeah, it was actually okay. And so So the only way to get people on board something which they fundamentally believe or are skeptical around, believe doesn't work or they're skeptical around it, is to try and design some experiments that are safe for them to get into and which will prove to them that it actually works or that it could be a way forward. So you start, it's like getting a tooth out, you start rocking the tooth a little bit and suddenly, boom, they say, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. It does. And in that process, so one of the first things, very, very often, I have this scenario when I'm coaching somebody, they say, well, I have this problem with my boss and they doesn't, or she doesn't see it my way, or blah, 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 blah. And so I try and teach people, and this is also the first way into better collaboration, and that is to learn to state your needs. When we get
Mm.
frustrated with other people, it's because we have some needs that are that are pressed underfoot, that are disregarded. And that frustrates us enormously. The problem is other people cannot guess always what our needs are. So we need to learn to express. And this is not just in the work situation, this goes for our relationships with our spouses and everything else. It's really the key to building strong relationship is to be good at expressing your needs. And so what I always try and explain to these people what I'm coaching is have a conversation with your boss about this problem. And they say, no, it can't be done, and he's going to tear my head off. Or as I say, the conversation goes like this. When this and this happens, it doesn't work for me because bop, 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 I need this in order for it to work better for me. Can we have a conversation around that? And so if you go to somebody and say, I think you're an idiot because you always do this and it pisses me off or whatever it is, then you don't get anywhere with anybody. But if you go to somebody and say, you know what, when we're working like this and you do that, then it doesn't really work for me because I can't get my deadline or I can't do this or I can't express myself, whatever it is. I need something else. I need more space. I need a smile. I don't know what it is from you. Can you help me with that? And even the most difficult person is actually thought up by that. It's really, really difficult to sit there and say, no, that's your problem.
Mm.
Because all of us go, yes, of course, I didn't realize that was a problem for you. Of course, I can fix that easy. We can start 10 minutes early. We'll just do it like this. Or I'll wait. It's very often very simple. And so I, time and again, have exactly this feedback from the people that I had that conversation with my boss and it was fantastic. And we got so much started, and I didn't realize, and she didn't, and she had never understood that I had a problem with that, and I don't know why I've never told her. That was really stupid of me. And now we've got a completely different relationship. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and it comes back to, in principle, we as human being, I think, Mike, we actually want to serve others, and that's all what servant
Yes, we
leadership is all
do.
about. And in principle, we all want, most people want
Yeah.
to do good and they want
Yes.
to serve others,
Yes.
in principle. But sometimes, if they don't know what needs they need to serve, you're absolutely right. It goes to all aspects of life where
Yes.
we
It's
almost think
awareness.
it's a conflict to talk about, but actually, people then say, "Oh, I'm a relief. Now I know exactly what button to touch."
Yeah.
Not to avoid any conflicts on that area,
Yeah.
and then
Exactly.
they do it, and then it doesn't mean that conflict will be avoided all the time, but you minimize it because it's actually conflicts that destroys the
Yes.
relationship and empty the
Exactly.
emotional bank account.
And it's generally due to ignorance. You
Yeah.
know, people aren't aware that there's this problem or that. We're all absorbed by ourselves, essentially. So what I have to get this done, this task, whatever it is, boo, boo, boo.
Yeah.
Not aware that somebody else has a different aspect or needs something or whatever it is. So it's very simple. Yeah.
On the journey in the last couple of years, Mike, where you, like anyone else, have seen a world there's been lots of turmoil, pandemics. Now we have living cost crisis around the world. Yeah, lots of people talk about the unknown and the complexity of the
Yeah.
uncertainty, the word used before. What have you
Yes.
been your most significant learning in those 2 years? Is that actually that we we really need to focusing on
You know,
collaborating, or is
it,
there some kind of other insight within that couple of years?
it's all fiddled into each other, whatever you call it, intertwined. But I think the most significant learning for me this past period has been when I started understanding Dave Snowden's conniving model about the difference between what is complicated and what is complex. And that has been a huge aha journey for me, because I've just come to, and this fits into the whole thing about the relationships and all the rest of it. But I think we have a for many, many years, I was in my understanding, I may have been stupid or naive, or I always thought that complex was just complicated, that was more complicated than normal,
Mm.
and I never understood that complex is a completely different kettle of fish.
Hmm.
And so the sense that the complicated world are things unknowable and predictable. And we can use engineers and doctors and all sorts of good people to work out how to do things, build things, and do computers and all the rest of it. But in the complex world, it's not knowable. We don't actually know what's going to happen, because there's no history to go back on. That's and then the next step in that is when we then look at, so from a systems point of view of thinking, that we know that, so mechanical systems are predictable and stable. Organic systems are unpredictable and unstable. And human beings are organic systems.
Mm.
And they are unstable because they're always going from one state to another. So they're, now I'm happy, now I'm sad, now I'm hungry, now I'm tired, now I'm enthusiastic, now I'm this. And we're always fluctuating, oscillating in different forms. And so we're all these sort of unstable entities. And then realizing that when we then sit and go in HR, we go, if we do this, this, and this, then they are all going to do that. It's not true. It's just not true. It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them will do it sometimes, but that's as good as it gets.
Yeah. In their own time.
Yes, in their own time. And so, this whole notion that as we move into complexity, being comfortable with standing in the unknown and in trying to work out, probing, and trying to find, so what's happening just now here? What is happening with this team just here? And listening and trying to get more clear. And this comes back to the, so how do we deal with complexity? It's relational. We tackle complex when things go belly up or epidemics hit or wherever it's the strength of the relationships that is able to tackle the complexity, because it's not a building, it's not a computer that can be programmed. You can look up somewhere, and you can, if you're expert enough, you can work it out. You cannot work it out. And I think that fascinates me, because the more I look around, the more I go, whoa, are we in for a ride? Because this complexity, that is increasing.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
And I guess also it's because people are really struggling with themselves, managing themselves through this complexity, both in, life and at work, because it's just thrown
Yes,
at you at such a speed, which we all have heard
yes,
about before. It goes back decades of strategy thinking. You talked about VUCA before and
yes,
so on. But again, now it moves so fast because of also technology that really
yes.
changes the game here, in
Yeah,
my view, as well, which brings lots of good things. And there's positive things with AI, there's also the downsides.
yes,
But we as humans have to
yes,
really, really move so fast, and
yes.
thereby we forget actually how to manage that. This actually goes back
Yeah.
to the quality of our
So we have
relationships.
to become much. Sorry, Michael. We have to become much better at what I call complexity awareness, understanding what is knowable and what is not.
Hmm.
And as soon as we move into something that is complex, we need to we need a different toolbox, and we need to approach it in a different way. And that's where we have a habit, especially in the Western world, of going, we bring in this expert and we bring in this consultant and this, and they know and they're going to fix, but they're not going to fix in that sense, because it's not knowable, it's
Hmm.
not predictable what's going
No,
on
they can,
in a lot of situations.
yeah, they can create a platform for getting more clarity if they
Yes,
facilitate the
yes.
process in a really
So
good
we
way.
have to stick our finger in. We have to have conversations. We have to ask people what's going on. We have to try and digest. We have to reflect and observe. And then in the moment, we can say, I think, I don't have the answer, but I think this is going this way. Oh, okay. It's going to, and that goes for all this talk about when we talk marketing as well. Go, oh, we're going to make a marketing plan and it's going to go like this. No, it's not. It's much too complex.
Yeah,
It's maybe go in this direction if we're lucky.
and rarely, it's important to make plans, but rarely it goes as you thought they would. And with
No,
and
of course
also
not.
often you make the plans too complex actually
Because
to implement,
there are too
and you
many
don't.
variable factors out there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And as you then start to work through those plans, you find out actually we need to simplify the marketing plan very much. And
Yeah,
I've just been through the last year of launching a new product where our first
exactly.
draft
Yeah.
marketing plan, marketing mix, it was insane. Like when I look at it now, I just think, what the hell were we thinking? Because
Lovely.
we need humans
Exactly.
to do
Yeah.
that, and now we're down to one
Yeah, 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 yeah.
activity. It's to get people to taste the product and meet the people behind the business. That's the marketing strategy. That's so simple, and also it's so
Yeah.
it's easy to execute on in a way, and it's a food product, so people need to taste it. What are you doing to get yourself going every day? Because you've been on this journey, and you can hear from your story you started out with that you've been like improving yourself all the time to make yourself better. You have these pivotal moments where you really have a shift in your mind, learning. But how do you actually approach every day? Because it's not like it doesn't happen, on New Year's Eve. It's like a continuous process. What do you do? We all do different things to keep ourselves on the right path.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had some really intellectual, insightful, wow answer to that. I muddle through like I think maybe some other people also do. I hear all these gurus, they have morning routines and all this. I have my basic go-to savior of so as not to go insane is that I meditate every day. And that is a really, really important part of my so and that's where I get to sort of settle down and gain perspectives on things. And then I try and get out on my bike in the morning and go for a quick run and then I get into the day, and it's not as structured as I maybe would like, but it's complex, and so it's seeing where things go, and I'm incredibly curious the whole time. So I'm constantly reading and doing stuff like that and listening. Always, I'm like a Hoover in that sense because I think the world is so fascinating, really, really fascinating.
It's really interesting, Mike. You're trying to anyway in a complex world of moose you're trying to take control of the morning, and that's the same I do. I have a couple of
Yeah,
rituals, but if I just do a couple of them, maybe you don't do all
exactly.
five. If I do a couple of them, I know I'm in a
Yes,
good state to actually face that
yes,
complex day because you can have a
yes.
plan, but the day probably is not going to go the
Yeah.
way you were thinking it's going to go. And if you
If
can
we're in
lean into
control of
that.
the first hour, we've already done pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. And then, also it's again, then you're preparing yourself for whatever happens, that
Yeah.
difficult conversation you didn't expect, or that
Yes.
thing that happened,
Yeah.
why the hell did that happen? And then you can much more be in that moment and
Absolutely.
actually and ask the right
For me,
questions,
it
as we
builds
talked about.
resilience. I mean, I'm much more capable of coping with chaos if I stick to that very simple morning routine of preparing myself for the day. In that sense, that's for me really important. When I don't do that because something happens or whatever, it's very
Mm,
rare. Then I'm much easier knocked off, get irritated and stuff like that.
yeah. Yeah, it's the small things that really matter. So
Absolutely, yeah.
what we're coming to an end, Mike, and I always ask this question to people, and I'm really looking forward to hear you answer this. So, what is your top advice, the advice you want to give leaders out there that wants build a business as a force for good? What is that?
You're not going to be surprised. You've got to focus much, much more on building the relationships. It's all about the relationships. Peter Senge had this beautiful model years ago, must be 20 years ago, where he said that the quality of our relationships drives the quality of our thoughts. And the quality of our thoughts drives the quality of our actions. And the quality of our actions drive the quality of our results. And the quality of our results drive, we're back to the top of the circle, the quality of the relationship. So when things are going well, we pat each other on the back. Yeah, we did this, we're good, and all the rest of it. And then the relationship actually is strengthened. When
Mm,
things are going wrong, we get into a negative spiral and it just goes down. It was your fault. No, it was his fault. And all the rest of it. It goes like that. So by being much more aware of the quality of those relationships, because we all know it. You know it. We have on our agenda today. You and I are going to talk together. And what's the first thought? Oh, it's Michael. It's Mike. That's gonna be fun. We're gonna have a good time. We'll have a good chat. And there are other meetings on our agenda. We go, oh God, that's going to be a long morning. and so we cannot say that it doesn't affect. Of course it does. The quality of the relationship determines how things are going to go. It's not just skills and all the rest of it. So that is the one thing that we need to get. So Dale Carnegie, we're all the way,
Yeah.
we're all the way back. But it's true.
Yeah, and I was not surprised you would answer that. So I think there's lots of good stuff for people to either reach out to you or go and check out your website. We'll come back to that in a second. But Mike, there's so much we could have talked about. Is there like one thing you wished I've asked you I didn't ask you, and what would that be, and what would the answer be?
What is the one thing that's missing when we talk leadership development?
Hmm.
That's the question. And from my perspective, the one thing that's missing that we seem to sweep under the carpet, we won't confront, is that we don't talk about vertical development enough. We don't really want to face it. There's this whole notion that it's not enough to acquire more skills. We need to develop ourselves, our personality, our perspective, our world view of seeing
Mm.
things. Because if we don't focus on that, we're going to get into really big trouble as humanity. The problem for me is that we've developed our society faster than we've developed ourselves. We're getting to
Hmm.
a stage where the fewer and fewer people are at a sufficiently vertical development level that they can actually cope with the complexity. Because complexity requires you to be comfortable with uncertainty. And that requires a certain way of looking at the world that is not evident. And so somehow we need to address how do we become more aware of what we need to do in order to develop this side of ourselves, the vertical development part. And that's a whole, I mean, we could talk about that for hours because that's a big
Yeah.
box to open. But that is for me one of the things that somehow it's the elephant in the room and we're not talking about it
Yeah,
enough.
so interesting because you can of course acquire skills, leadership skills, technical skills, skills about and
Yes.
understanding about AI, but actually what we often forget is actually how to actually lift ourselves so we can lift others, I often say. And it become very evident interviewing people here on the podcast when you start talking with them. They all the wonders really, really where they just in the silent background, Singerman's, Honestberger, and so on. These companies, that the founders, the CEOs, are actually working more on themselves than anything else. Like really, really to expand their own mind and
Yes.
control of themselves because they know they're going to be hit by things they don't know about today. And one of the things I picked up from them on that journey was I actually read when I was quite young. I had a professor at university that talked about the Stoics in leadership philosophy. And I came a bit back. And one of the things I picked up in the world as accelerated was Stoic philosophy, was actually talk about your only job is to prepare yourself for the future, death, uncertainty, and actually
Yeah.
be ready for it. And actually, therefore,
Yeah.
you have to work on yourself every day. That's your job.
Yeah.
That's your number one job to be a good human. It's to work on yourself.
And a lot of people don't understand really what is the concept of vertical. And I like my favorite short explanation because and it is really short. It's the ability to take ever increasing complex perspectives, more and more complex perspective. When we are born, we only have one perspective. It's me. I'm hungry. And some people never get any further. I mean, but so it's this ability to start seeing a much bigger picture. And as the world gets more complex, we need that.
That was the perfect place to end this amazing conversation. You said there's so much more we have to explore, and I'm sure we're going to have another opportunity, Mike, as we
Oh,
move
it's
into the
fun.
future. Future, but where can people find out more about you? Connect with you if they want to. Maybe they have some
Always
questions
happy to
now.
connect on LinkedIn. I'm very
Yep.
happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. I like that. That's my favorite. It's my only sort of really social platform in that sense. And otherwise, MikeHohnen.com is where you find anything about me if you want to know anything about me. So
Great.
it's very simple.
Thank you for taking time out just before you go on holiday to have this conversation.
Thank you, Michael.
I send you power and energy for the journey ahead, and I look forward to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.